Beneath the cobblestone streets of Paris, far below the laughter of cafes and the glitter of the Eiffel Tower, lies a different world. A labyrinth of bones, darkness, and whispered memories that the city itself has long tried to forget. This is not a story of mere history. It is a descent into the heart of what remains when life is stripped away, leaving only silence, skulls, and shadows. The catacombs of Paris, a vast underground ossuary, hold the skeletal remains of more than 6 million souls. Each skull, each femur, a silent witness to the fragility of existence. But this is not where the story ends. It is where it begins. For as you step deeper into this realm of death, the weight of the stone, the press of the air, and the cold, damp breath of the catacombs awaken something older than memory. In the late 18th century, Paris faced a crisis the living could no longer ignore. The city's cemeteries, once sacred resting places, had rotted into overfilled pits of disease, their decayed contents seeping into the drinking water, poisoning the air. Mass graves burst at the seams, spilling their long-dead occupants into the streets. Death was no longer hidden. It was an invader, a neighbor, a stench that clung to the skin. In desperation, city officials turned to the ancient limestone quarries beneath the city, caverns carved out over centuries, and began the harrowing task of transferring the dead, bone by bone, into this underground necropolis. By torchlight, under the gaze of hollow sockets, workers, many of them prisoners, beggars, the forgotten, carried endless remains into the depths, stacking skulls and bones with grim precision. What they built was not merely a tomb. It was a cathedral of death. The deeper one walks, the more the living world fades, until only the echo of footsteps and the steady, accusing gaze of the dead remain. And it is said, by those few who have ventured too far, that something else lingers down there, something not entirely dead nor living. But that is a story I must tell you carefully. There was a man whose name history has nearly erased, a man whose footsteps still echo through the catacombs long after his bones have crumbled to dust. His name was Etienne Delaroche, a lowly gravedigger by day, a forgotten soul by night. Etienne was not like the others. While most who worked in the catacombs carried bones as mere burdens, he began to feel something. It started with whispers, faint at first, then louder, curling through the corridors like breathless sighs. He told himself it was the wind, only the wind. But the voices grew persistent. They spoke in tongues he could not name, languages long dead. Night after night, as his hands touched the cold remains of strangers, something inside him unraveled. One evening, deep beneath the Rue des Innocents, the very cemetery whose decay had sparked this entire exodus of the dead, Etienne lost his way. The torchlight flickered, shadows bent unnaturally, and the walls seemed to pulse with a breath not his own. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time itself in that place had no meaning. The deeper he wandered, the more the walls closed in, until he stumbled upon a chamber unlike any he had seen before. Skulls were stacked not in neat, reverent rows, but twisted into grotesque patterns, circles within circles, forming a symbol that chilled the marrow of his bones. In the center of the room stood a single skeleton, fully intact, dressed in the rotted remains of what must once have been regal robes. Its eye sockets seemed deeper than any skull should be, as though they stared directly into his soul. And then, yes, then it spoke, not aloud but in the marrow of his mind. It offered Etienne a choice, to leave and forget, or to stay and know. His heart thundered with terror, yet something older, something darker compelled him forward. He stepped closer. The chamber's air thickened, the bones on the walls seemed to shift, watching, breathing. When his fingers brushed the skull's brow, a vision erupted. Rivers of blood, the screams of thousands, Paris drowning not in water, but in death. He fell to his knees, sobbing. When he awoke, the skeleton was gone. The chamber was empty, and yet something inside him had changed forever. Etienne Delaroche emerged days later, silent, pale as the bones he had once carried. He never spoke of what he saw. But they say he returned to the catacombs again and again and again, until one day he vanished. Some say he is still down there. Others say he never truly left. Years slipped by, and Etienne Delaroche faded from memory, becoming nothing more than a whispered legend told by the few catacomb workers who dared to descend too deep. Yet the catacombs themselves seemed to remember him. The darkness thickened, strange disappearances began, first animals, then men. Those who ventured beyond the marked paths sometimes failed to return, their last words etched in panic, voices, footsteps that followed without form, shadows that moved against the torchlight. By the dawn of the 19th century, the catacombs had grown into something more than a burial site. They became a living tomb, a breathing darkness that seemed to hunger for those who entered its heart. In the Paris above, revolutions raged and empires crumbled, but below time stood still. One autumn evening, a young scholar named Lucien Marchand descended into the depths, driven not by duty but by obsession. Lucien had heard the stories, the tales of the lost gravedigger, of skulls that whispered, of doorways that led nowhere and everywhere at once. He sought proof, not of the supernatural, but of history itself. What he found was far worse. Armed with lanterns and maps, Lucien pressed deeper than any official tour or worker had dared. He marked his path, but the tunnels shifted behind him, subtly but deliberately, as though the catacombs themselves resisted his intrusion. Hours passed, his lantern began to dim. Then he heard it, the footsteps, soft, measured, coming from all directions at once. His breath caught in his throat as figures began to form in the shadows, faceless, bone-thin silhouettes that moved with unnatural grace. Lucien called out, his voice brittle with fear. No answer, only the rhythmic scrape of bone on stone. Then faint but clear, a whisper, "Turn back," but he did not. Some unseen force pulled him onward until he reached a vast cavern, the walls slick with centuries of damp decay. In the center stood a circle of skulls, identical to the pattern Etienne had found decades earlier. And there, resting atop the pile, was a single object, a tarnished gold ring set with a black stone. Lucien, trembling, reached for it, only to feel the temperature plunge. Breath crystallized in the air. The walls themselves seemed to groan. He snatched the ring and fled, chased not by footsteps but by something colder, something that pressed against the edges of sanity itself. When he emerged, gasping beneath the pale moonlight, he clutched the ring tightly. His hair had gone white. His eyes, once vibrant, were clouded, haunted. And from that day on, Lucien never spoke a single word again. The story of Lucien Marchand vanished like dust in the wind, another lost whisper beneath the bustling streets of Paris. But the ring, oh, the ring did not vanish. It surfaced decades later, in the possession of a nameless wanderer who claimed to have found it buried in the soil near Père Lachaise cemetery. It was worn, blackened by time. But the moment his fingers touched the cold metal, he too was seized by dreams. Visions of corridors lined with skulls, of cities drowned in darkness, of shadows that had no master. The catacombs, it seemed, had marked him, as it had Etienne, as it had Lucien. Some say the ring was not an artifact of human hands, but something older, an anchor, a relic from a time when what we call death was not an end, but a door. From that moment, rumors of the catacombs darkened further. Urban explorers, thrill-seekers, even historians vanished without explanation. The whispers returned louder than before. Those who spent too long within the maze spoke of walls that breathed, of tunnels that bled, of faces glimpsed in the corners of flickering torchlight, faces that did not belong to the living. And then there was the film. In the late 1990s, a video cassette was discovered near an unmarked entrance to the catacombs. Its footage, distorted, trembling, showed a man wandering alone, his panic mounting as the tunnels twisted around him. His breathing quickened, his flashlight faltered, and then, suddenly, he dropped the camera. The final frames captured only the dark, but in that darkness, movement. Something unseen, something that watched. The man was never identified. The camera was real. Today, the catacombs remain, a quiet, patient darkness beneath one of the most luminous cities on Earth. Tourists walk the safe paths, admiring the artistry of the bones. But beyond the barred gates, deeper in the forgotten miles where no map dares to reach, something ancient stirs still. The names change, Etienne, Lucien, countless others, but the story remains the same. A whisper, a choice, a descent. And perhaps one day you too will feel the pull of the catacombs. And when that time comes, I ask only this: will you turn back, or will you step forward into the dark, where history, memory, and the living dead are all one?